Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO and I have a confession to make. I absolutely love alumni magazines. I think they are one of the things that marketing and communications offices get to produce that has some staying power. But alumni magazines are changing, and I feel like this is a great time to reconsider how you're adapting your magazine. That's why I'm so delighted to have Clara Schwager on the show today. She is the Director of Institutional and Advancement Marketing at Johnson and Wales University. She specializes in crafting narratives that advance institutional priorities, strengthen brand reputation, and inspire connection. With 15 years of experience across higher education, agency, nonprofit, and corporate environments, Clara brings deep expertise in developing and executing strategic marketing campaigns. When she's not hunched over the keyboard, she's trying her best at Olympic and power weightlifting. I hope you enjoy the show. You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast where marketing minds in higher ed come to pull back the curtain, spill a little tea, and talk honestly about what it takes to market in this industry. I'm Jaime Hunt, the founder of Solve Higher Ed, author of Heart Over Hype, and a former campus CMO who spent more than 2 decades navigating the weird, wonderful world of higher education marketing. This show is for the strategists, the storytellers, the change agents, and anyone who has ever tried to get Faculty Senate on board with a rebrand. Here we get candid about the challenges and share the ideas that are shaping the future of our field. Sound like your kind of conversation? Then let's get into it. Well, hi, Clara. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I'm so thrilled to be talking about you. I cannot believe that I have gone almost 100 episodes without talking about one of my favorite things about higher ed, and that is alumni magazines. I started my career as the editor of an alumni magazine and brought together 3 sort of newsletters. This was way back in the olden days, 2004, 3 newsletters into one beautiful, I want to say we did it 4 or 5 times a year magazine. And it was just like one of the most joyful parts of the job. And you just redesigned yours, correct?
We did. Yes. Yes. Well,
So,
let me just say, first of all, I guess it's about time to talk about magazines. And what an exciting thing to talk about. I think, yes, to your point, we recently just redid our magazine of almost 20 years at Johnson and Wales.
when you first talked to me about this episode, you talked about reshaping the magazine. And I would love to hear what that means. Like, this sounds like it was more than just visual design, that there was more to it than that. So tell me a little bit about what your redesign entailed.
Yeah. Yeah. This was a large scale exercise. So we examined everything from editorial structure and design to distribution, more specifically, size and page count and paperweight and printer. Our list, we did some optimizations. And then our promotional strategy. There's a lot of content strategy that went into this reshaping.
Tell me more about the content strategy. I'm super interested in that.
The impetus was, it was not as useful of a tool as it could have been. Its impact kind of stopped at the mailbox because the magazine was the sole storytelling mechanism. And I was really interested in lending my content strategy and promotional expertise to creating a hub and spoke model
Ooh.
so this evolution really looked at building out content and translating the great print stories to web or video or social, email, and even paid content, because print is expensive, and all of those other channels, say for paid content, have amazing reach and no media cost.
I need to hear what you mean by paid content. Like, what does that entail?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and is it working?
Yeah. So maybe I'll back up a little bit. I am director of institutional marketing, and I think it is unique sometimes for the magazine to find its way underneath that vertical. And I have not always overseen the magazine. This is a relatively new asset in my portfolio, and at first I was interested to see what I could bring to this process. And it was really fun to lend my understanding of media to storytelling and the progression of that storytelling, the planning, the implementation, the distribution. And for me, I sit squarely in the paid realm as well. So I know I want to be very economical about our resources and I want to leverage them across all of our different content areas. And so if we're telling amazing stories about our alumni or the institution in the magazine, I can find space in paid places to leverage that to full circle tell the story of the university in a broader sense.
I did not know you were doing that leading into this, I guess. And I am absolutely like, this is what everybody needs to be doing. Honestly, if you're listening to this and you're not figuring out how to leverage your magazine content in other ways, please keep listening to this episode because I'm going to be asking Clara a lot of questions about this. But this is really what we need to be doing. We spend so much time and effort on our magazines and on writing those beautiful features and on the storytelling that comes with that. And to have them not live anywhere else, to only be in this print piece
Hmm.
that shows up in the mailbox is just a shame.
Hmm.
And I, I'm really curious, give me an example of like a before and after. What was content that might have been before in the magazine and how have you shifted that?
It just came out about 2.5 weeks ago. It's beautiful. A shout out to our great partners at Skelton Spruels out of Maryland. We had a couple features. Your typical alumni profile, one that's a little bit more institutional in nature, and then one that was examining our core curriculum and how we're revamping and contemporizing. It's a beautiful piece about our institution that's incredibly distinctive and compelling. And I kind of molded it into a thought leadership piece that we worked with the Chronicle and sent out an email to folks. I used the same beautiful illustration within that paid sponsored content as you would see on the front of the magazine or within the feature well. So there was that cohesive through line from an aesthetic through line, and it performed really well. I mean, we got to see lift from readers and time on page, and I mean, just generally speaking, we've seen a tremendous amount of efficacy from this redesign, and I can go into those metrics later. But I think in content ecosystems, the magazine is at the center of it, but there's all of this great trickle down content that we use across our earned, owned, and paid channels.
This is brilliant. And I'm curious, I'm really curious if you had any problems convincing people to make this change.
No, no problems. I think generally speaking, we are in an industry that chafes against radical change. And
Mhm.
I don't think this is a radical departure. I think good marketing departments have been, brilliant about their content strategy for a while. It just hasn't always translated to the magazine. So
Mhm.
this is definitely a new approach, certainly for Johnson and Wales and its magazine. But it's not a radical departure for how we do marketing, generally speaking. So I think it wasn't a far cry from what to sell that we should also do this for the magazine. And I think as we start to educate folks on even in these early days, the return we're seeing from an engagement standpoint. I mean, year over year, we've seen a 30% increase in web traffic to the magazine site. We've seen
Wow.
a almost 19% time on page increase. So people, this is resonating with people, this content, this format, this design. Obviously, long tail, we want to make sure we're seeing impacts on everything from, enrollment and retention to development. But, that will come. But I think this is nascent in some ways, and then in others, we've been doing it for a long time.
I think the concept of having your content strategy extend to your magazine is easier when it reports to somebody who has that overarching viewpoint of the magazine. Like, for an example, when I was at Miami of Ohio, their magazine is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It's been, the editor has been there since the 1980s. She is sharp, she is talented, top notch. but she reported to institutional advancement and not to my team. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there. That at other institutions where they reported up through me, there was a little better ability to have the larger context. And so if you're in that situation, I would give the advice of, having that conversation with their leadership about how can we make this more tightly connected to the overall content strategy. But I'm curious if you would have any recommendations for someone in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So we work very closely with Advancement. They are absolutely partners in this endeavor. They help us, unearth these great stories. We certainly want things laddering up to their development priorities, but at its heart, I think anyone wants to emphasize good storytelling. And I think marketing communications folks know how to do that really well. And part of that is not just in content, right? Part of that is in distribution and thinking through what channels that's in, how folks are consuming that, what's most effective. Because I don't think anyone wants to create content for content's sake, right? Like we want it
Mhm.
to land with our audience. We want it to have um, impact at the institutional level that meets all of our goals. And so I think that's the real tool for advocacy here is regardless of where this media asset may live, look at it as that a media asset. That this is a living, breathing way to storytell, and it needs to meet 2025 storytelling channels. And any good marketer will say a story is only as impactful as the channel it's told within.
Well, as long as we're talking about channels and how folks are consuming content, I'm curious about how you learned about how alumni are consuming content and how that might have shaped your overall strategy.
During this redesign exercise, we did, as you might imagine, a lot of focus groups, spoke with our alumni, our donors, our larger community members. And whenever we spoke to them, I always felt like it's kind of like leading the witness a little bit to ask specifically about how they want to consume the university magazine, but instead would just generally ask how they consume media, how they consume their news, information, entertainment, what channels are they drawn to, and for what types of content. I think that was really helpful, really insightful, and ultimately led us to move towards a much different, more digestible format. Folks could skim, they could peruse, they could sample. We still had the kind of meaty features, but our other content was much more digestible. It actually allowed us to cover way more and have a much larger impact.
Well, I imagine much like a buffet, people could go back for more. Do you have content that publishes off cycle or is it all timed with the print piece?
Yes, I think this comes down to, diversifying our content has allowed us to get much more mileage out of that content. So we only publish the print piece twice a year, but having a dedicated email before each issue, teasing it after each issue, we can release podcast content further down the line. We have, video vignettes associated with a feature perhaps can come out at a different time. So it just diversifying our content allows us to be much more sustainable with our personnel and our creative efforts, and allows folks to engage with the content over a longer kind of horizon.
I love that. And I'm going to be really interested in hopefully getting an update from you after you've done maybe a couple issues to see how you've seen that evolve and the usage of that. One of the things that we haven't touched on yet is that you have multiple branch campuses. And the aforementioned example that I gave of the alumni magazine that I combined multiple newsletters for was somewhat similar. It was like all these entities within the college had their own magazines. I'm using that term loosely because they were all black and white or like one color, one PMS plus white or black, but to combine into one magazine. I'm really curious, how did those branch campus either complicate or enrich your storytelling strategy? And how did you maintain that cohesive voice when each campus may have its own culture?
Yeah, yeah. I can feel all the listeners who work at an institution with multiple campuses leaning in. Yeah,
Right.
so anyone who works in a centralized capacity and navigates those complexities, good or otherwise, it's not easy. Knows it's not easy. But this redesign exercise was really helpful in creating a strong editorial underpinning that
Mhm.
was echoed across all of them, right? Like, so we really focused on our institutional brand values and our differentiators that were shared. And I think the departments in the feature well content reflected that really deeply, and our commitment to things everyone recognized. So educational, experiential education, rather. Our industry expert faculty, our industry responsive programming. And then from a visual standpoint, we were also very intentional about moving toward dynamic classroom images and internships and student life, as opposed to some of the more traditional static campus scenery. Those images are really anchored in our educational approach and philosophy rather than perhaps like a specific campus location, given we've had several.
I think that it's so important to kind of have that like one institutional strategy while allowing the flavors of the branch campuses or, the other aspects of the institution to shine through and have their piece in that story. So I think that's fantastic that you've been able to navigate that. Did you have any pushback from any of those branch campuses, or did it feel like a win for them that now their voices maybe a little more clear in the publication?
Everybody wants more. And I
Yeah.
think, as Johnson and Wales has shifted its locations and spaces over time, we have to be very creative in how we tell those stories. So we've had campuses that are no longer around, but still have a very robust and engaged alumni population. And so, again, laddering back to those institutional priorities allows us to bring them into the fold. But I think it's really hard when you publish, a 32-page magazine twice a year to make sure we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of each campus. I think broadly speaking, we just wanna make sure everyone feels incorporated and part of an institutional asset that's, builds pride and community and affinity. That's a tall order. And I also should
Yeah.
say, just like any campus in 2025, our campuses extend past brick and mortar, right? Like we have a really big, growing online population. And so incorporating those stories into our magazine. Sometimes we'll have students come to campus and participate in different programming, and making sure that if there is someone who won an accolade or was speaking on campus or has a really neat story, post commencement, that they're also seen within the magazine.
That is one of the things that I feel like is a challenge for folks that have an online component that maybe is more self-contained. So a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my clients have their online programs, have their own marketing teams, their own comms teams. And I think it's really easy for the on-ground communications team to forget about those online students, but they're part of the institutional story too. And I think it's really smart and really needed to have a strategy for engaging their stories in the overall institutional story. And I think as online continues to grow, and at a lot of campuses, online is growing while on campus is shrinking, that's going to become even more essential.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and I should say that we are currently structured in that our online folks have their own marketing, but we have made very intentional steps to weave in a lot of our content planning and to have periodic check-ins to make sure that we are functioning in a more collaborative way and really thinking of it as another campus, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, it can be a little bit more challenging. I was almost going to say very challenging, but it can be a little bit more challenging to get some of the student stories from online because they're scattered all over the country, or they're not physically on campus to photograph or interview. But there's some of the coolest stories are our online students. I know at the last institution I was at, there were some really remarkable student stories among the students that were in our ODU Global, and they were doing absolutely amazing things while balancing work and caring for family members and caring for children. And I just think that does them a disservice to not consider them part of the overall story of the institution.
Yeah, I mean, I think the population as a whole is really emblematic of 2025, right? Like, and almost the magazine in and of itself. I think a good magazine in 2025 is reflexive and innovative, and it morphs to meet the consumption habits of the time. Same for our online population. I mean, we are needing to reach people and new and different locations at different times in their careers and educational journeys. And so I think we want to be just as nimble as those students are with our storytelling.
I love that. Nimble. That's exactly the word that I was
Mhm.
reaching for and not quite grabbing. And I love that. And when you think about it, your alumni of on campus programs could be potential candidates for an online program, or maybe they have a child that is non traditional but wanting to go back to school. And they didn't even really realize that there were online programs because when they were a student, there weren't any. And this is how they're learning about that. Donors who want to support students who are coming back after being out for a while. I mean, these are important stories. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So while we were chatting, I went back and looked, and our alumni magazine, when I was there, came out 4 times a year. And I know that was 2024. I know in 2026, probably most institutions have shifted to fewer editions a year. And I'm really curious about how you are optimizing the cadence of the print piece with any additional other content that you're developing in order to maximize and meet those alumni expectations without overwhelming your staff.
I think that just comes back to diversifying content. So that's where, when we are able to create a lot of, if you call it trickle down content, the spokes off the hub content, we can use that over a good amount of time leading up to the issue and after the issue. So we don't need to produce a nice glossy magazine more relying on additional resources and spend. We're creating very smartly content that can be used over a longer timeline. And so we're serving up in different ways too. So we're not kind of fatiguing our audience through one channel. They might be seeing it on social, they might be seeing it in their email inbox, they might be listening to a podcast. And so I think that just allows for smarter, more sustainable content.
I think that is really smart. And I think that like the era of we're just producing this and then we're going to think about it again in a couple months is just over. I don't think we can do that. If anybody's still doing that, probably no one is. But it's something that just needs to have like get up in the morning and be thinking about the next issue and how you're going to tease it and what content you're going to have in it and what stories you're going to tell. And I'm really curious about how you defined success for this redesign. I'm such a big proponent for having something measurable that's defining why we're changing strategy, and I'm really curious about what success will look like for you.
Yeah, it's a big question. So I think, generally speaking, we want to see qualitative and quantitative results. So I think that, is this resonating, right? Like we talked a little bit about it before. I was looking at our site visits year over year for this issue compared to last fall's, and was delighted to see that 30% increase. And also, meaningful engagements like time on site, people reading the content, perusing the content. And that increased by 19% year over year. And then we also launched our inaugural, it's a dedicated university magazine email. And this is to non-alumni. We've always done it to an alumni population, but this is really to stakeholders and constituencies outside of the university, along with parent and families. And I think we saw something like a 55 plus open rate and a
Wow.
5% click through rate. Yeah, so great numbers. Like, this is clearly intriguing folks and connecting. So those are really great, encouraging early on metrics. But then there's also, the qualitative. So I'd love to talk with more folks and do focus groups. Does this asset elicit pride, connection, affinity? Are folks wanting to participate at a higher rate, right? Like, that's something I'm looking to move the needle on. Are we seeing more submissions to our class notes? Are more ideas being sent to us? And then long tail impact. I mentioned this as well earlier. So like our colleagues in advancement. are they able to use the magazine in a more sophisticated manner to engage their constituency? So something new, and again, this is just kind of fun, but it's new, and it's a creative way to think about this content after the fact. Is we created custom envelopes and bookmarks, and on the back of the bookmark is a place for handwritten notes. So our development team can put it in a bookmark page, send it to an alumni or donor profiled, or perhaps someone who's not even in this magazine, but the content is relevant to the conversations they're having. So just being able to use this in a whole bunch of different ways to elicit connections.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how you think that the fundraisers might be able to use the magazine?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite conversations. So, I can go down the rabbit hole on this one. So I think development is all about relationship building. That's at the heart of it. So is a magazine. I think it is capturing really dynamic, compelling, emotional stories about people connected to the university. And if someone is in a conversation with a donor or an alumni, I think they can connect back this content to that conversation. Are they talking about, this could be institutional related or academic, athletics. Is this donor interested in, a study abroad content or experiential learning? They want to see industry represented in the classroom, you name it, right? Whatever ladders up to that original conversation. And then I can work with the team to kind of atomize this content into a million different ways to connect with folks. Maybe it's a cold connection, maybe it's a warm email, maybe it's a closing connection. But this is fantastic fodder to solidify start relationships, solidify relationships, continue them, what have you. This is just one more tool that they can use.
Do you think admissions teams may also use some of the content or the magazine itself as well?
Absolutely do. The same way I think about content and content strategy, there's a beginning and then there's kind of end when it comes to bookending the actual asset itself. I think of that from a population standpoint. Our admissions at the kind of beginning of someone's journey with the university and maybe our development at the end. But admissions can absolutely harness the power of the storytelling, right? I mean, I think prospective students and their parents and families want to hear about the outcomes of the
Mhm.
university. They want to see the success of alumni. They want to see what perhaps a degree that seems opaque might translate to in the working world. They want to hear what the priorities are of the institution. Is it sustainability, et cetera? So I think again, these these can flex to meet the channels and the populations that are your department's priorities. That's really what I hope I can bring to this process. Full circle to what my initial comment in the beginning about, when I took this on, what was I going to bring to it? And I think it really is that content strategy and making this fit for all audiences.
There are so many great stories in an alumni magazine that could be repurposed for a drip campaign, could be repurposed for a parent campaign. All of that content is so vibrant and you put so much effort into it. And I hate to say it like this, but I think this is really natural. I think our tendency is to really polish up that print piece content at like the highest possible level. So making sure you're leveraging that super polished content for maybe making an ask, defeating some prospective students' questions. If they're saying, I don't know what I can do with this degree, or I don't know if I'm going to be successful if I pursue this major or whatever. I love that you're thinking that through. And it's something that I think is essential, honestly, for magazines going forward. I'm really curious about how your team may be leveraging AI in this process or in the content strategy process or in the production of it, or if that's something you're not doing now, what you might be doing with that in the future.
We're having lots of conversations about AI generally in the department, but I think specifically for the magazine, we've used resources like Otter AI for transcriptions. We're looking into Speechify, which is kind of a text to audio translation. So I'm looking to kind of insert that into the top of our features, not only for something like ADA, but also we're going to be starting a Spotify playlist of our
Oh,
features
nice.
so folks can listen to them kind of like a podcast. I think it's a great springboard for repackaging longer form copy for all the various platforms we talked about. So email and social. We have an intranet that we can kind of parse apart for our community, and then also our paid content. Um, and then just generally, the proofing process with our print partners has gotten much more digital and streamlined. It's not exactly the same as generative AI or like LLM based content, but it's definitely in the AI in a more broader sense something I've seen come a ways in the last couple of years. Um, I would say editorial wise, that's a little bit more of a tricky area, as you might imagine. People feel a lot of ways about that. I think we want to stay true to our readers, and we author our pieces. But AI is a fabulous tool for brainstorming and packaging.
I would say I do training across the country at institutions for how to leverage AI in their work. And I would say almost universally, the person that's sitting with their arms crossed in the back of the room, glowering at me, is the magazine editor. And I fully get it. I try to tell people when I do these trainings, honestly, content creation is the worst thing that AI does. That's the thing it's the worst at. So don't even think about it for that, but think about it as being able to do a first pass edit. And you can specifically direct it not to make the changes, but to just list what changes it's recommending. You, like you said, you can have it repurpose. You can have it make edits as detailed as you want, or as granular as you want, or just really big picture. Does this tell the story? What might I be missing here? There's just so much that you can do with it. So if you're a magazine editor, I totally get it. I do not want you to use AI to write your magazine stories, but think about how you might be able to leverage it to do other things that allow you to have more time to craft those really thoughtful stories.
I think that's exactly right. And this has been such a wonderful opportunity to really get that insight, the person with the crossed arms perspective,
Mhm.
because previously, my world really was a lot more marketing content, a lot more paid content. It's not as authentic from a storytelling perspective. It's really kind of technical from a channel and execution perspective, and working in the world of the magazine has been really refreshing when it comes to taking a step back and letting the stories lead, letting the stories be precious, but perhaps not the format be precious, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense.
We don't want to change that. I don't think that is in no way our priority. We just want to be more effective and efficient in meeting the consumption habits in 2025. But yeah, I think we derive a lot of um, pleasure from seeing time spent on these stories, the research, the conversations, and don't want to touch that.
No. Well, even the focus groups, I do a lot of focus groups in my work, and being able to run those transcripts through AI to look for like key insights,
Hmm.
or qualitative surveys versus quantitative surveys where there's a lot of open ended questions. It's so much faster to be able to analyze those results if you're leveraging AI for that versus having to like hand code all those responses. I think we can move a little bit away from some of the times when we're asking quantitative questions, when we now can ask qualitative and get a much clearer picture of that qualitative data. I get why people are resistant, but I do want people to think about it as a tool that isn't just for creating content, that it can do so much more.
Yeah,
Um,
well said.
I'm really curious about what advice you would give to a university leader who's thinking about reimagining their magazine for the first time in 20 years or maybe ever. Where would you say that they should start?
Yeah, maybe just to repeat myself a little bit with my last comment is be precious about the stories, but not the format. I think
Mm,
approach the exercise from a point of genuine curiosity about media consumptions and habits in 2025. And I think university magazines have always been good at storytelling. They've done it for a very long time. But it's tactical at this point. How are they adapting these stories for mediums that people are now drawn to? So audio or video, social web. Um, I also think in higher ed we love to benchmark ourselves against industry peers.
Mhm.
And that works for maybe the academic or the enrollment side of the house, but I don't think it always is in our best interest in marketing.
Mhm.
And it's especially true for the magazine. So one of the great examples I love is like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the series Vogue's 73 Questions on YouTube.
No.
It's fabulous. You should absolutely go see it. And it's a creative spinoff from obviously their print, and it was started in 2014. Most universities
Wow.
didn't even have like a cogent, social strategy in 2014. So that's what our kind of industry or non-industry peers are doing. They're already ahead of the curve on how people are consuming content, how they're spinning off things that were once in print that can live elsewhere. So, Vogue, if you're listening, I'm happy to answer 73 questions about the minutia of higher ed marketing. But yeah, no, I think, again, that's just one example of many where we can kind of peer over the fence at what others are doing and doing really well and give a try.
That's so smart. We so often compare ourselves to the university down the road, forgetting that what's in our audience's mailbox isn't the university down the road's magazine. It is Vogue, it is Time, it is, all these other publications and catalogs, and what's showing up in their inbox isn't the alumni newsletter of 45 other institutions. It's other publications, other passions that they have. And you're absolutely right. Like a magazine's a magazine is a magazine. Like it's not some magical higher ed elixir. We need to be thinking about it in the context of everything else that's competing for their time. The Netflix shows that they're watching, the podcasts that they're
That's right.
listening to.
Yeah, and I think
Love it.
from an advocacy tool, because I think sometimes going to your senior leader and saying, "Hey, I'd love to do this. X or Y are doing it," and they say, "Well, that's not really our industry. It's not really like that's kind of a bold move." I think you just have to also remind them that those industries have bottom lines. Those industries are quite literally doing that because there's an economic imperative, and so they are seeing something. They are seeing the writing on the wall from a consumption habit. So I do actually think it's a good advocacy tool to break out of older, less dynamic content habits.
Yeah. Well, if folks want to chat with you about this whole topic, where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn at Clara Schwager, and you can check out Johnson& and Wales magazine at jwu.edu/magazine. And happy reading.
The magazine looks beautiful. People should check it out and see how beautifully done it is. And as always, listeners, you can find me on LinkedIn, Jaime Hunt, Jaime. You can also find me on my website, 12highered.com, or you can find my book at heartoverhypebook.com. And I'm always happy to chat with listeners. Clara, this was fantastic. I'm super thrilled that you are the person I had on the show for the Alumni magazine topic because I just think your strategy around this is so smart. And I'm going to be eager to see how it evolves over the next couple months and years.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, listeners, let's go bust some silos. Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and contact drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.